Hey everyone, this is Color Theory for UDK December 2011. I'm Campbell Crapsey from Cohort 17 and today is January 22nd, 2012. I'm part of the group that's doing the lighting presentation for UDK. This is specifically on color theory and how you use colors to affect a scene. So as you can see here, we have red, green, and blue, which are the three primary colors according to the additive color theory, which is what UDK uses. Basically, UDK simulates real light in real-world situations by having colors add instead of subtract, like in pigments. So some of you may have heard about how you'll have cyan, magenta, and yellow for primary colors, and that's pigments. The primary colors in UDK are red, green, and blue. So basically, what you can do with this is you can combine these primary colors, these three primary colors, to get secondary colors, as you can see here. So basically on the left we've combined blue and red to get kind of a purple lavender type thing. And then down at the middle we have combined green and blue to get teal. Now you can obviously create a color just by setting the properties within the light itself, but what I'm trying to show is how you have to be aware of how your lights will interact in UDK to create new colors. On the right we've combined all three primary colors to create this white spot in the middle. Moving on, you can combine more than just primary colors, so you can actually combine any set of colors to get different properties. So like I mentioned earlier, on the left here is this teal wall, and that is a single light spot, and that single light spot is projecting that color onto the wall. In the middle here, we're combining two secondary colors, kind of a purple and a little bit of a pale yellow, to create kind of a skin tone. And so what you can do is you can get really fine in terms of the types of colors you want to create. So if you want to create kind of a theatrical scene, instead of just having a single light source projecting that light, you can get more of an ambient effect by combining different secondary lights. That's when things go right. Here's when things go wrong. I've combined three different secondary colors to create, oh, and I forgot to mention, over here, that skin tone is a tertiary color, is the technical term. So here I've combined a bunch of secondary colors, and it's kind of turned into this big off-white brown mess. And so that's kind of the thing you want to avoid. You don't ever want to combine colors so much so that it just becomes this blah effect. You need to be aware of how your colors are interacting with each other. So over here I've created a scene that demonstrates contrast. So in color theory, or in the color wheel, the primary colors, like I said earlier, are red, green, and blue. And then the rest of the color wheel is made up by all the other secondary and tertiary colors. Here we can see how that color wheel breaks down into warm colors and cool colors. So warm colors are basically your reds, your yellows, your oranges, and cool colors are your greens, your blues, and most of your purples. So on the left we have a predominantly blue scene with an orange spot, and on the right we have a predominantly orange scene with a blue spot. Now the amount of light and the focus of the light are exactly the same for both of these walls. But on the left you can see that your eye is naturally drawn to the orange spot on the blue wall, where on the right it's not actually really drawn to the blue spot. In fact, the orange dominates the scene. And the reason for this is that warm colors, so once again your reds, your oranges, your yellows, warm colors actually dominate the scene. Warm colors pop first and attract your eye, whereas cool colors actually kind of fade in to the perspective of the viewer over time. You notice warm colors first, and then the blues and the greens kind of round out the scene. So moving on, I've created kind of a daylight type of light to show how really subtle changes can actually affect even scenes based on daylight. So on the right here, we'll start here, is a pure white light, only one pure white light, that's projecting onto the statue. And as you can tell, it's a very sterile image. It's a very white, pale light. And so when you're making lighting in levels, you generally want to stay away from this because it seems more like a hospital than it does like a real life outdoor environment. And then the other side here, you see it's very yellow, very, one would think that this is a very natural light, but in fact, real outdoor light is more of a cool light than a warm light. And what I mean by that is it actually has more blue than it does orange or yellow. And so even though the sun itself is yellow and orange, it actually comes, like light actually comes to the earth as a very blue color. So this scene is probably not the best for outdoor lighting because as you look at it, over time you're going to start to notice that it's a little yellower and a little orangier than you think light should be. And so going here, this is a very pale, very cold white light, and this is closer to what actual outdoor lighting is. It's got a little bit of a blue tint to it. And so this is kind of what you want your outdoor scene to be. Alright, so moving on, we're going into this big lit room with the floating cube. And really all I want you to notice in this room is the amount of light. So we've come in from kind of a lit environment, and so our eyes are already adjusted to that color of light. So we're going to go ahead and move on through this dark hallway, and I'll explain why we're doing this in just one second. We're going to come into this room, which is very bright, or at least appears that way. But what I want to show off here is that it's the exact same room with the exact same lighting and the exact same shapes that reflect the same amount of light. But when you move from a dark area to a light area, or vice versa, from a light area to a dark area, your eye notices the contrast and it appears much more apparent. So even though when we first entered this room it appeared very, very bright compared to the other room, it's actually the same amount of light. So as a level designer or as an artist, you want to play with that to really create a cinematic effect for moving into different scenes or different rooms. Alright, so now we're going to move on into what actual colors mean to different people, because there's always a color context. For every single color, there's a cultural context. So here we have a statue that's bathed in a red light, and red usually means to a Western audience fire, violence, warfare, love, or passion. And red can actually raise blood pressure and respiration rates in people, and can also sometimes make you hungry, which is a little weird. But you need to be careful. This is just an aside. You need to be careful when you're playing with messages that you want to convey through color, because in China, for instance, instead of it being fire, violence, warfare, love, passion, red generally means prosperity or happiness. And sometimes in other cultures, such as in India, red is worn by brides on their wedding day. So South Africa, for instance, also red is the color of mourning. So not mourning as in daylight, but mourning as in sorrow. So you generally want to watch out what kind of messages you're sending with color, because color can mean different things to different people. So red we've covered, and now we're going to move on to kind of an orange light. And orange is a very energetic color. It represents the earth, autumn, change, movement. It's very friendly and very inviting. You want to use this for levels where you're trying to radiate a very healthy, autumnal type of scene. And so we're going to move on to yellow. Yellow is the brightest and certainly the most energizing of the colors. It represents happiness and sunshine, hope, cheerfulness, but it can also represent deceit and cowardice. It means a lot of different things, once again, to different cultures. In Egypt, it represents mourning. Once again, that's sorrow, not daylight. In Japan, it's courage, and in India, it means merchants, which I don't know if that's right, but I found information that yellow is a very clear indication of merchants. So there you go. So yellow is very energetic. You don't want to use it too much because it's a very overpowering color, much like red is. You don't want to use either of those two colors too much because it'll actually dominate your scene and it'll make it look really fake. Kind of like a bad sci-fi movie. So moving on, now we're going into the cool spectrum of things. So now we're looking at a green light. And green actually is a very natural light, as I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are aware. It symbolizes renewal and abundance, but it can also symbolize jealousy and envy. It's a very natural energy base, so if you're trying to portray energy, green is a really great color to go with. In design, green has a harmonizing effect. Brighter greens are more energizing and vibrant, while olive greens are more natural, kind of more of earth tones. And dark green generally represents affluence. So now we're going to skip over here. So now we have a blue light, and blue is a sad color, but it can also be a calm color. It can represent responsibility and peace. An important thing to point out here is blue is not a stable color, and what I mean by that is that, like most of the other colors, when you change the shade of blue, it starts to mean different things to different people. But with blue especially, when you change a shade, it can mean wildly different things than it did before. So each shade of blue can mean something very different and very distinct in terms of an emotional state. So if you're trying to portray a very depressing scene or a very calm scene, you need to be very careful what kind of blues you're creating. So we're going to move on. Oh, and dark blue also represents strength, which is important to point out. So here we have a purple, kind of a lavender, And an important thing to point out here is most of the lights I've chosen for this particular room are not pure purples or blues or whatever. It's actually kind of a mix of a couple of different light, and I'll back out here and show you that I actually have a lot of different light spots that are projecting onto different statues. The reason for this is that when you use really solid colors, it actually floods the image that you're trying to project onto and makes it very ugly. So I'm using something that's similar to three-point technique, and what it does is it gives a nice shadow, which you can see at the base, but it also fills in the scene in a very natural way instead of just being solid colors that kind of blot out all of the actually interesting features on the static meshes. So purple stands for royalty, creativity, imagination, romance, and with romance especially, that's more of a lavender than a true purple. And in Eastern cultures, especially in Thailand, it is the color of mourning, sorrow for widows. So moving on, now we're going to get into naturals. And so what I've done here is I've projected 3 different lights onto the statue all at once. One of them is a white light, one of them is a brown light, and another one is kind of a rosy light. And I think the rosy light's coming from your left, which is why it gives kind of a weird haze to the outside of the silhouette. Neutrals are really used, to demonstrate another color. Neutrals never really fill in a scene by themselves, so your blacks, your whites, your grays, and most of your browns are actually there to really enhance other colors, because as you can see looking at this, the light doesn't add anything to the statue. It actually, you can see it very clearly, but it doesn't add an emotional state. So black usually represents power, elegance, formality, evil, death, or mystery. And I want to read you this great quote, which is hilarious. It just shows how color theory can be interpreted in so many different ways. Black is commonly used in edgier designs as well as in very elegant designs. It can either be conservative or modern, traditional or unconventional, depending on the colors it's combined with. So clearly it can do anything you want it to. White is usually purity, cleanliness, virtue, goodness, and in terms of it being an enhancer, it acts a lot like black. Usually you see black or white backdrops. Gray is a very moody, very depressing color, but it can also be formal and modern. And then brown is obviously very natural, and it's important to point out it's a warm natural. You very rarely see a cool brown, and so usually when you put brown in a scene, although it is a background color, it will actually pop a little bit more than most of your other neutrals. So you need to be a little bit careful about how you do it. So thanks for watching. I'm Campbell Crapsey, cohort 17, and this has been Color Theory.